Good afternoon. I'd like to call together the Climate Protection Working Group meeting, and we'll start with the land acknowledgement. On December 10th, we acknowledge that this sacred land on which Smiths Falls is now located has been a site of human activity for over 10,000 years and is rich in Indigenous history. This land is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We are grateful to the Algonquin ancestors who cared for the land and water in order that we might meet here today. We are also grateful to the Algonquin people for their contribution in the making of the Rideau Canal, which runs through Smiths Falls. We are mindful of broken covenants and the need to reconcile with all our relations. Together, may we care for this land and each other, drawing on the strength of our mutual history of nation building through peace and friendship, being mindful of generations to come. Okay, so we'll start with approving the agenda. Are there any additions to the agenda today? Sue?
I can do it under the roundtable, but just a little update on the county information.
Okay. Are we okay to put that under roundtables, Marie? Perfect. Okay. Any other additions? Okay, so I'll recommend the motion to approve the agenda. Moved by Nate, seconded by Peter. All in favor? Okay, motion carried. And we'll take a look at the minutes from our last meeting on November 12th. Were there any amendments to those minutes at all? Seeing none, I'll recommend the motion to adopt the minutes. Moved by Nate, seconded by Steve. All in favor? And motion carried. Okay, any disclosure of monetary interest? None noted. And we'll move right on into priority issue. Looks like, Richard, you're up with the Climate Lens Priority Framework.
Okay, so it's a Climate Lens Toolkit policy framework. Calling it a toolkit just makes more sense because it's more than just one thing. So we'll go to it. So essentially, the toolkit has three components. It has the Climate Crisis Assessment Questionnaire, it has the Greenhouse Gas Calculator, and then there'll be an update to the council reports to include the Climate Impact Statement. So the criteria for the toolkit essentially is that for any plans or policies or projects that produces greenhouse gas emissions, they'll be prompted to fill out the questionnaire, and they will be also prompted to calculate their emissions for their project. If they already know the emissions, they don't have to go through it, but this is just for people who don't have the skill set already, and this they can just follow the steps in the toolkit for the calculator to get their estimated emissions. So the questionnaire will be for people to essentially determine the climate impact for their project. It's kind of like a stop and think moment where they'll have the ability to question if they're producing any emissions with their project, if their project is linked to any of the goals in the climate action plan, and if there are any possibility to either reduce emissions or to consider alternatives. So this is more or less an ability to just quickly assess, whether or not the impacts their emission are worth it, essentially, for their project or their plan. It's in process, so what I have at the back of the page for the report is a draft of the questionnaire. I'm essentially trying to narrow the focus and get it really streamlined so that we sort of have a sense for how we can assess quickly. So it doesn't feel like paperwork, so that there's a real point to it. So if you have a moment now, you can look at the back of the report and you can see the list of questions that I've outlined for the questionnaire, just so you can get a sense as to where I'm going with this. So essentially part of it will do a project title and a description of the whatever plan or policy that they have. And then there's a list of questions that ask them to figure out essentially if there's producing emissions, how much, if there are links to the climate action plan, and if their ability to reduce emissions or not. So that's kind of the basis of the questionnaire. And the other part would be the greenhouse gas emissions calculator. So this would be adapted from Bob Argue's model. At this point, I'm trying to create a model that Bob uses, but it's kind of focused on the municipality so that it's sort of tailored for us, essentially. Because Bob Argue's could be used for the individual as well. So if we're able to tailor it to the municipality, I think it'd be a lot more effective for people and it'd be more easier to use. And then the other section would be the council report. So essentially for council reports, there'll be two components. One would be to identify if there is a strategic link to the climate action plan or any goals that we have. For example, someone's looking to retrofit certain buildings, that'd be a goal that we have, so there's a link there. and also to determine the expected emissions so that we can sort of assess if this is producing it in an excess and if there's some sort of explanation for it. It's supposed to be just really simple, not a complete full detail analysis, but similar to how council reports the budget implications, it's just a way for us to acknowledge the different perspectives for any proposal plan that's being proposed in the council kit. So that's the long and short of it.
Peter?
Thanks, Richard. And I'm looking around the table for help. The city of Ottawa had something in the news 2 weeks ago about the staff have been doing the climate lens on their reports to council for a while. And one of the councillors or the committee members said, and so I'm looking for people to remember this story. It was just 2 weeks ago. It was, if we do this, this is the impact on the greenhouse gas emissions. But there was another part. Does anybody remember that? Just 2 weeks ago. If we don't do it, what's the impact? I think that was what it was.
Interesting.
If we adopt this strategy or whatever, it has this much impact. But if we don't do it, is that what it was? Does anybody remember it?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the item, Peter, but that is my main thing with this, Richard, is that it needs a comparison. So you don't just figure out the GHGs for the 7 electric fleet vehicles. You figure out what your downside option would have been, right? Or your fossil fuel option would have been.
Right.
And then you do the comparison.
It's something like that. Ottawa says we're missing that. They've been at it, and they say we recognize now that there's a gap in information. So we should just look, because it made sense as soon as I heard it.
Yeah. The issue, I mean, and the other thing you're looking at as council frequently is you get the cost estimate, right, in your report on some action. But it's harder to figure out the cost estimate to the climate and the impact.
There you go. That's right.
If you don't do it, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know how Ottawa figures that out, right? But anyway, they may have some information. So
to your point, we did talk about comparisons. The reason why I didn't include it because I wasn't sure how well to bring it out, because I understand that comparisons are important, but what comparisons to what, right? So I wasn't quite sure how well to compare apples to apples, so to speak.
Well, it's basically business as usual. So if you're buying 7 new trucks, then the 7 trucks that would have been fossil fueled, right?
It makes
Gasoline,
sense.
Diesel, whatever,
Yep.
versus what the options are. So
I like that.
Just a little feedback on that. I can speak to how they calculate carbon sequestration with biochar operations, because it's based on that principle. It's relatively straightforward to get like this much biomass went in and it was converted to carbon. The more elaborate calculation to determine how many carbon credits you get for that needs to look at what would have happened were it not for this operation. And for that, feedstock is everything. Like, for example, the reason why the idea of doing it with the municipalities' green waste is so attractive is because that the but-for analysis shows that was going to be heavily processed. Trucks were going to pick it up anyways. It was going to get burned and released into the atmosphere. So virtually everything counts as a net plus towards sequestration. Whereas if you were, for instance, doing a logging operation just for making biochar, none of that would be true, and that context would mean that you don't get nearly the same amount of carbon credits. So the context is everything. But generally, for what we're doing, when we make an analysis of reductions, that's based on both of those figures. It's not like it's not just in the abstract how much is removed. It's what would it look like otherwise, and that's. I know we kind of go around in circles on this, but like as an example with the solar panels. Where those solar panels are geographically really determines how much carbon credits they get, because if you have a solar panel in the high north where the alternative is a diesel generator, very, very highly efficacious. If it's happening in a place like this where 90% of the power is coming from nuclear, literally 1/10 the amount of carbon, and that's the but-for analysis.
I like that. I like that.
Sue?
yeah, I'll just add. Have you had a chance to talk to Brody at Perth?
No.
Okay, do please. He has done a deep dive in the climate lens for the town of Perth.
Do they use one?
Yes, they are and have literally just adopted it or are about to. So please talk to him. He's worked with Bob, but he's also gone into deep detail with it. You might as well take advantage of the work that's been done.
Yeah, you're right. Love that.
So I'm interested to hear how Perth's actually operationalized it.
Yep.
Was the plan that, so council gets a report, I don't know if staff, if everybody's ever seen one, the standard. This is the stuff, this is the issue, this is what is a bold staff are recommending this. They might give you 3 options. Then they talk about, is it in the strategic priorities? You know, why is it here? Do we have the money to do it? What would happen if we don't do it, or any risks? And then would this be attached to that, or it would just be, this is a staff tool and there would be a summary of this
So
in the staff report?
my idea was that for the staff report, if they're doing the options and analysis, they could use information from that questionnaire to bolster their argument for whatever they're proposing. But this is more an internal rough work for their own analysis, essentially. So my hope is that if they're doing the internal rough work and if they're bringing this to council, we could see at least, okay, there was a consideration here. It doesn't mean that you have to attach it, but this is more or less what I would need so that they can understand what they're proposing and that they've considered the environmental impact.
It's to get the corporation really
Yeah.
built it into their everyday
Yes.
work.
Yes.
Okay.
But if I could add to that, so yes, absolutely to get staff engaged in thinking that way all the time. But also when you get that report at council, Peter, you see the dollar figure, right? And you should see then, in effect, the GHG figure. You know, it should be that apparent, the climate issue, right? It should just be in your face. So, yeah, if it's GHGs, if it's, you know, a statement about how the impact is on the climate, I'm not exactly sure, but it should be up front.
I really like this, Richard. I just have a question. Will there be any guiding questions to help staff fill this out? Like, so for instance, number 2, will this project produce or reduce GHG emissions? If they're not sure, where do they go to sort of figure that part out? Are there any guiding questions or resources that you can direct them to, or how?
That's a good point. I guess. So I know so we are thinking of workshops to explain to people necessarily how we sort of fill out the questionnaire as well as how to use the calculator. But hearing your question now makes me think that maybe I'm assuming that they already know how to get to the answers. But maybe that's right. Maybe they don't actually know how to assess essentially what they're looking at first. So maybe we need to add more clarifying questions so that they can understand, well, this might reduce emissions if it's doing X, Y, and Z. I just assume every person has an understanding of what activity would likely produce emissions, but maybe not.
Go ahead.
And I'm thinking, were you here when Bob presented?
I think that was like my first meeting, so I don't really remember
Probably,
much.
Yeah, you were here in the special.
I was here, but
Okay,
I'm not
yes,
sure if I was
yeah,
here.
yeah, no, that's fair. And so he would be happy to come back and present again.
For sure.
And Richard, please circulate that template to everybody, because you can literally go in, you know, and look at it from the perspective of your own house.
Oh, that's neat. Okay.
And plug numbers in and see what happens, right? And so that's exactly the type of thing, that tool that staff can be playing with, right? In terms of 7 vehicles or whatever, right? Plugging the number in and see how that calculator works.
Okay.
It's fun.
Yeah.
It truly is.
I think I'd condone with what Sue suggested, and even more, have that session taped so that, you know, the general public will be able to learn more about that approach, right? Yeah, and if we have the data even available from the town's website, then we get more people engaged, right?
Peter?
So the follow-up, or what I think, I'm selfishly thinking about me as a council member getting a report, so so we would, we bring Bob back, but we also have the Perth model to look, so for our next draft number 2,
yeah.
is that, we would just do this one more time with, is that the thinking?
So my idea was that when I bring this back, it'd be a lot more polished and a lot more clarification would be there. And then once you're all settled on the fact that this is sort of what we want the policy to look like, then we can further brainstorm workshops and how to operationalize it with more workshops and other things.
We want Bob at the next one to work. You would work with him, or if he agrees, you should give him an honorarium. Is that the thought, or?
I don't know when to bring Bob. I don't know when to bring Bob in, because unless we all agreed how the calculator would be used, and then Bob would give us an explanation how to use it. But yeah,
I was thinking about the lens. Questionnaire.
Okay, we'll go Carl and then Nate and then Sue.
Yes, and I'm thinking about this from the perspective of a frequent author of a report to council, and certainly making sure that when we're drafting a report to council, there's a lot of things we look at. How does this assess the strategic plan? What are the financial impacts? Who have we consulted? What did they say? Doesn't mean we're necessarily going to, let's say we're putting together a piece on a planning policy, and we've consulted with a department. That department may not necessarily agree with what we're producing, but at least it provides council that information to make an informed decision. Same thing here. It doesn't necessarily, the staff recommendation will assess, and council's decision will assess a whole bunch of different pieces, this being one, but it sort of front and centers that so it's clearly part and parcel of the conversation. So I think part of what we're framing here, and certainly to build up that engagement for the management team who's going to be using the tool, is making sure that the questions are relevant to us, and they kind of help us sort of assess, well, firstly screen when does the tool get used, and then how do we use it from here? So those are meaningful questions that we can work from there. And I guess the question for Richard, maybe that follow-up conversation with Bob, I think there's lots of different climate lenses out there. Bob has one model. There's lots of others used. So I guess working with Bob, who's sort of our local expert, but also developing the flexibility to create a Maiden Smith Falls approach that works for, I guess, our own sort of reporting template, and see where, because I don't think necessarily that the Excel spreadsheet he produced is necessarily the one that we have to go by. Maybe it can be adapted to somewhere. So I think working with this group and with the management team, one of our objectives can sort of be to customize the tool to meet our own needs, since our needs aren't necessarily, they're probably similar to Perth, but they're not necessarily the same as Perth.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Nate?
I just wanted to add, there's a great resource. It's called the Green Builders Alliance. They have a website. They basically provide this service to municipalities where they engage them and offer guidance on how to craft policies that limit greenhouse gas footprints. And they've done, like, it's a coalition of thousands of builders that are in this space, and they've done elaborate modeling on the different implications. And so they've got recommendations that this isn't my area of expertise at all, so I'm not going to do it justice. But essentially, from reading it, what they've described is that they found that medium density housing overall provides a sweet spot of low carbon footprint, and they describe policies that I think would be exactly the kind of guidance you guys were hoping for, that you can adopt that lower greenhouse gas footprint. And they also have guidance there about how you calculate those things and the various building material options that you can, because a lot of it is you can look at the same project and a question of, is this going to create your greenhouse gases or not? That might be I don't know. Right. But a more maybe helpful decision tree would be well, if we make this out of sticks as opposed to steel, as opposed to, right. Look at if we insulate it with fiberglass as opposed to hempcrete, and there's types of building that actually sequester enormous amounts of carbon. And then there's other types that are enormous emitters of carbon. And just, if you provided a pathway, a decision tree that just steered towards the lower emitting options.
Yeah, I like that.
Sue, did you have anything to add? Because you were number 3, but if it's
Yeah, a couple of things. So one, having talked with Bob many times, he is more than happy to just put his spreadsheet out there and leave it to people to revise, adopt it as they will. Okay, that's his gift, if you will, to the situation. I would strongly, though, encourage you to talk to Brody because he has looked at other lenses. He's truly done a really deep dive on this issue, and so I think you could probably pick up a lot from him that then guide you in terms of how to go forward, right? In the next one, the next iteration of this, and to the issue of builders. There's a plethora of organizations now, and one we're dealing with closely is the Decarbonization Alliance of Canada. When very, very interesting stuff. But when we get into that discussion, we can bring forward all sorts of stuff about building. So, yeah.
Carl?
Just to update this group, we are in the process of writing a new official plan, and council's directed us to proceed with 5 key themes. One of those themes is sustainability, and I think what's going to sort of be the result of that whole project is ultimately sustainability becomes a more sort of institutionalized evaluation criteria when looking at any sort of planning application, any sort of development decisions that council's going to make. And I think assessing the alternatives using that, as Sue brought up there, looking at the sort of the alternatives, if we need 7 cars, what about a gas powered versus electric, and what are the different alternatives there? But also just thinking about how we're going to be relating that to, say, a development decision. I'll just use an example. About a year ago, council approved a zoning application for a mixed use building at the corner of Main and George. So I think certainly from a sustainability perspective, we're looking at infill, higher density infill development on existing services. It ticked a lot of the boxes, but what's the alternative? Are we evaluating? Are we evaluating putting that out on the edge of town? Is the alternative that we not approve this and we just leave the site as is? So those are the sorts of things that operationally we're going to have to sort through, certainly as staff, in terms of providing a sort of a meaningful evaluation and recommendation to council.
John?
Thank you. I mean, the question may be more for Carl, but I guess what's your interpretation as to when the lens will be applied? And I'll use an example. So let's say council approves a number of projects in the budget, and including those projects are 3 HVAC replacements. And so staff have direction that the money's in the budget, so it'll go through a procurement process, but they issue a tender for the replacement of existing HVAC systems, indicating natural gas being the choice. Then it comes to council later with a council report for approval of the supplier, which staff have vetted to be the most suitable one, and based on the terms of the tender, we're faced with a natural gas solution. At that point in time, we're having to go back and potentially redraft, and we apply a climate lens, or council decides we would rather see a electrical heat pump solution. So based on what you read, would that be applied early enough in the process to ensure that we are properly applying the climate lens to the decisions that may happen a month or 2 later?
That's an excellent question. Certainly the lens should be applied at a time when it's meaningful, so that it's not a sort of a token exercise that's done later on to tick a box. Earlier on, we might not necessarily know the answer to all of those questions. I'll throw this over to Richard, actually, see if you've what your thoughts are.
Okay, so I did think about this. I didn't include it here because it wasn't really fleshed out. So I was speaking with Public Works. So for example, they do a lot of procurement. They typically know what they need. They're just getting it essentially. So sometimes the climate considerations don't come first because they're looking at costs. They're looking at what works. So if it's something that's more reliable or something that is effective, then their consideration of the climate seems to be secondary. So I don't necessarily know how they would prioritize what works if they already have a system in place. My thought was that they would amend the procurement bylaw to include a consideration for the climate. For example, if people are bidding for something, that they would put in the climate considerations in their request for a proposal, so that we are sort of evaluating that as well as part of the metric. So that's my thought, really.
So that would make sense where we apply it as soon as possible to any procurement process.
Yes. If it's not in the bylaw, there's no real reason to apply it. It's more of a consideration, but not a shall. But the issue that I have is what takes precedence. I'm not quite sure how you will balance different values, right? You're looking at finances, it links to the strategic priorities, now the environment. I don't know what comes first. I know it's like all a pillar, but the people.
Well, and maybe that's where it comes down to council to make that decision, right? So that's where the lens may be applied early in the process, and perhaps we have the two alternatives coming to us. So use the HVAC as the example. We have one which is electrical, maybe more greenhouse gas friendly versus the natural gas solution. They both have a 30-year horizon function. And then council can decide based on the reports we receive which one we want to proceed with.
More to come.
Sorry, but there probably are costs in your report, right? Estimated costs. And so one of the cost points would probably be that if you choose the electric version, you're going to get X amount of federal dollars towards that, right?
Exactly.
But if you choose the natural gas, you're not going to get any subsidy. So, you know, those are all the factors that have to come into play in that, right? They really are.
Peter?
I just picking up on Sean's procurement. I just assumed that when we get to the initiatives, one of the initiatives is to look through all. We have a procurement policy that's signed off by council. All of the policies to see, holding a lens over them, and to say how do we.
Interesting.
Is there an opportunity there too? So it's a different lens, but it's you're not buying, but you're looking at your policy. So I just assumed we would do that at some point.
I didn't consider policy update because I didn't really think of it. I mean, it makes sense, but I don't know how far reaching this is. You know what I mean? It's like you did not have the current policy, and now we're doing waste management in town. It's interesting. It touches a lot of things.
This has to be the one-time thing where you make that change, right? And yes, there's a transition issues, there's adaptation, all that sort of stuff in that point of transition. But ultimately, this has to be a key consideration at all times, right? When climate change is not going away, right? And so it just has to become part of any council's decision making at every point.
John?
Yeah, and I think the other factor, of course, is climate resilience. And so if we're making decisions too, we need to, let's say are we going to go with asphalt shingles next door, or are we going to proceed with steel? One's going to obviously last for a long time. One's going to be replaced again in another probably 15 years. Or we're doing water and sewer work, and we know that based on potential rain systems, maybe it makes sense for a major trunk sewer line for storm sewer. Do we end up going a little bit larger because of the possibility of significant rain events that could lead to issues, right? So I think it's a matter of like, how do we, it's not simply the dollars that come into play here. There's a lot of factors I think we need to be able to consider. So a lot more complexity to it when we start talking about it more, right?
Yeah.
That's why we're here.
Yeah.
But
I'm realizing.
this has to start, right?
Yeah.
Has to start. So
Okay.
And I assume this policy framework will be a part of our action plan. It'll be built into the plan as something that we're measuring, evaluating, and
Yes.
yeah.
It
so
would
it's-
work otherwise. It needs to
Yeah.
be in there. Otherwise, initiatives don't go anywhere.
actually, sorry, but that raises a whole other thing about costs. I mean, right now, one of the things that the treasurer should be doing is accruing the costs that the town is paying towards the carbon tax.
Oh.
Because when you do the evaluation of costs, right, if you're looking at something that you're not paying carbon tax on, that's a dollar saving. So that needs to be, should be being done right now, frankly.
And if I may, I'm Chair, forecasting those costs over, so again, when a decision is made, let's say for natural gas, forecasting where the expected carbon tax will be, where they're doing the cost analysis for certain projects.
And even if the carbon tax is taken away, there's still going to be a hidden carbon tax. So what is that going to be, right? And tons of economists have figured that out. So it's there. The dollar value is there.
I guess this would be part of business as usual.
I think the focus got to be on how much carbon emission are we saving, because the cost is going to be influenced by whoever comes to be in power. And that you cannot falter until those policies are formed, but it affects us all. However, we do this because we really want to reduce our carbon emission. That's the focus, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. This is great.
Okay.
Did you get all that, Marie?
Oh, yeah. 3 pages of notes already.
So moving forward, we're not going to bring in, what was his name? Sorry? Art. We're not going to bring him into our next meeting, correct? Like that, we're not bringing him into the next meeting.
No.
He's going to maybe work with staff management piloting.
So once we have something more polished and we're ready to bring it to the committee, then we'll bring him in for a discussion. But until we have a solid idea of like how this will come together, then we will bring forward it. So you'll get an update about the second draft, and then after that we'll discuss when to bring him in. Yeah.
But if I could appeal, do share the Climate Lens document with everybody.
Yes.
So they can all play with it.
All right. I'll email you guys a Climate Lens.
Thank you. Okay, is that it for you, Richard?
Yeah, that's it for me. Yeah.
Okay, so
When, I mean, the clock's ticking, so I just wondered about timelines, Richard, when,
Anyway.
well, this is, I mean, in a way, we're using this. Sean asks questions at the county about their buying and pushes back on natural gas. A lot of county members did on that. We're trying to do it here. We aren't waiting. We don't need to wait for a tool, but the sooner that workshop happens for staff, and do we have to wait till the plan rolls out and is approved by council, or do we want to pile?
I would say at least until the policy is the final draft is done. So it doesn't have to be approved by council. The second draft of the policy would need to be done before we move to the workshop phase. Council can approve the policy in principle with the final draft, but the workshop can happen after the draft is done.
Which policy?
So this Climate Lens
This policy
toolkit
framework?
Yeah,
The
so
toolkit.
once that's drafted and you have
Okay.
something to work with, then we can discuss the workshop. It doesn't have to go to council for it to be the workshop to happen, but at least until we have some meat and for the policy, then we can move forward.
Okay.
So next meeting we'll have more meat, but we won't move forward until after that discussion. Does that make sense?
So spring, I think.
Well, January, I'll say end of February.
And I think, management meets every couple of weeks, and this is something Carl can probably bring up at the management meeting, that we're in the process of developing this framework and toolbox, and that it's an expectation that it will be approved by the Climate Protection Working Group in Q1. So to give staff the heads up that it's coming, we'll be coming to council, and so that they're aware that, start thinking that way, maybe even share it with them, so you have a chance to sort of start to even use it in certain situations where it might be most important to use.
Yeah, maybe they can test run it first and see if it works.
Yeah.
We did initiate this a year ago,
Yes,
right? And we had Bob in, and I think there may have been one management person who attended that presentation.
Yeah, that was Paul from Public Works. So I think the issue with his presentation for Bob Rogge was that management wasn't sure how it applied, so to speak. Like they understood the concept, But when it comes to their operations, they were thinking, okay, so when do I use this? How does it help me? That kind of thing. So I think the concept made sense. Application is where he struggled. So not to say that it wasn't a good presentation, but they didn't know where to go from there. And then it stalled out. And then now we're here having that conversation again to get it going.
Okay, I'm just making the point that I think he probably would be happy to come back and have just, you know, a or not one-on-one, but, you know, a small group with him if they were interested. So I don't think
That
there's
workshop
a
that
need.
they talked about.
Yeah, I don't think there's a need to wait overly long to get started on it, right? You know, you may bring in more stuff from outside or from Brody or whatever, right? But if bringing Bob in just to meet with the management group made sense, I don't think there's a reason to wait on that.
So when would you propose, Bob, or you present a workshop? Like in the January or in February? When would you
Earlier
propose?
than
Early?
later, yeah, just to keep things rolling.
Okay.
Carl, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think, just to build on what Richard said, when this was discussed around the management table earlier, we looked at it, we thought, well, we need more information. It was a great start. It was somewhat, I guess the original presentation was somewhat academic, but there wasn't a whole lot of meat there that really informed our operational discussion is how we're going to use it. So I think having these conversations here at this table to sort of frame that from an operational perspective, I think that's definitely the next best thing for us to do as a group, and then report that back to the management team. So there's a little bit more, I guess, context and information about how we can operationalize that in the future, and then we can sort of frame those conversations with. And sort of stage at what point do we get council direction, at what point do we bring Bob Argue back. Certainly when we bring Bob Argue back the next time, we're hopeful that we're dealing with a few more I think specifics about how that's going to unfold.
Yeah, I guess I'm just saying that Bob is many decades of dealing with municipal staffs, and he can cater to your particular needs. That one presentation was for all of us, right? Mm-hmm. So, you know, if you wanted him to talk detail, I have no doubt he can do that. So.
Okay, so we'll move on to project updates. 6.1 biochar initiative, Nate. And just for clarification from my perspective as chair, is this an update on the biochar initiative, or were you wanting to speak more to the contamination that was uncovered and the MOE, or?
Oh, it's a great question, and I think the confusion is that those are being discussed as though they are different, and when they are in fact the same thing. I'm sorry, could I trouble you? I brought a media release for everyone. I think we can definitively answer that question right on the nose with the media release that was just put out. I'm sorry, could I trouble somebody to just distribute that to everybody? I'm sorry.
Is this a media release from
Smiths Falls? So the Smiths Falls media release from November 21st, I think very clearly describes what the biochar initiative is, how it relates to the town's climate protection policy development. To me, it seems like very clear that the biochar remediation project is well within the scope of the climate protection working group. I understand that there's some good faith disagreement about that, so I was just hoping we could discuss that and settle it. If it's the case that this is in fact an inappropriate venue for me to be presenting updates, I'm happy if you guys recommend a different venue or something. I'm wide open. We're not trying to force it on this venue. It's just important that there's some form of transparency, and we're getting resistance to transparency writ large. And so I was expecting to just present an update, and instead I experienced some resistance, and people were concerned that the biochar initiative was somehow outside the scope of the climate protection working group all of a sudden. So I want to clarify that and help me better understand why that would have suddenly become the case. But just so we're clear, if I could just read a couple of sentences here. Even the first sentence, I think, basically asks and answers this question. But the first sentence of it is, the Smiths Falls Biochar Pilot Project continues to make progress in its efforts to contribute to a cleaner environment and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Right there, it seems very clear we're developing climate policy for Smiths Falls. To be clear just about the background of the biochar initiative, like this group is developing climate policy and that's wonderful, but in terms of the policy that's already passed through council, received some funding, is going through the process of getting permitted, to the best of my knowledge, the only thing that involves carbon sequestration that the town has actually passed is this biochar initiative. Like in terms of what's actually gone beyond the ideation phase into implementation, the Smiths Falls climate action policy is the biochar initiative right now. We're hoping to bolster it and add a whole bunch of other things, but right now, to the best of my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, the only thing we're doing to sequester carbon is pursuing this biochar initiative.
Yeah, so you are wrong.
Okay, what else are we doing to
We've done a
sequester carbon?
complete audit of all of our energy systems, changed over tons of we've gone to battery operated vehicles. We've done, there's lots of other initiatives.
And to clarify, what I'm saying is carbon sequestration. Those are all reduction things and they're laudable. But in carbon sequestration, I don't think I'm wrong. I think, unless you can point to an example of carbon sequestration.
So you asked yes or no, is this the right venue? I say no, it isn't. And it's for lots of reasons, but I'm very interested in the biochar initiative, but that sidebar or takes us down into a whole pit of discussion on the contamination. And that's a process that's outside of this discussion, in my opinion. It's important. I'm going to watch it with great interest to see how it plays out. The proper authorities are responsible. I don't see it here, Nate. I see the biochar initiative. I'm interested. As far as I can see, it's delayed because of this ongoing look at the contamination there. But that's great. So tell me about the biochar initiative. I'm not interested in these.
Sure.
Because it was more than that. You put out a policy saying this, or a draft motion.
I think you're misunderstanding what I'm asking for. I'm just asking to be able to present updates. I'm not asking for power or anything. But allow me to explain. I think you've already ruled out that we should be discussing this without hearing the context. So if you'll give me a moment to just describe how we got to this place. So two meetings ago, I provided an update in this forum about the biochar initiative. And it was very positive news, and I hope to very quickly get back to very positive news. The Redo Roundtable has been working closely with town staff to bring this biochar initiative through the regulatory process. I was asked to present the opportunity to use biochar to remediate the compost site to the MOE. When we talk about, are we talking about the remediation or are we talking about the biochar initiative? They're the same thing. This project has been about remediating the compost site using biochar. I did a presentation less than 2 months ago to 8 different members of the MOE from different divisions so that they could evaluate our proposal as the town of Smiths Falls to remediate this site using biochar. This is very clearly part of our carbon policy because it's an effort to sequester enormous amounts of carbon. When we talk about the pricing and that but-for analysis, I remember in the last meeting I was describing by using biochar to remediate sites that are contaminated, it pays for itself. You get a bump in property value, you get all of these ancillary benefits that cover the cost of making biochar. Almost every meeting I describe how the use of biochar by Smiths Falls has public policy implications for biochar, for our carbon sequestration initiatives. After we did that meeting, and the meeting was great, most of the subject matter of that meeting was about presenting the academic support for using biochar to sequester heavy metals. That went very well. I presented 8 different meta-analysis. It was not an easy meeting. They very rigorously examined the science, but they were satisfied that this is an exciting opportunity, and the licensing program that they're proposing is one with a very fast turnaround. There's a 2-month turnaround before we could start remediating the site. So full steam ahead. They just gave me a big homework assignment, and I described that homework assignment in the last meeting, where I needed to gather all of the paperwork related to the site, like the previous licensing and everything. And this is where I think there's some confusion. It's not like we went deep undercover. I just asked the town, can I please have these documents? Because the MOE is asking for them to put together an application to remediate this site. In fact, I've been working at a different contaminated site in Vermont. So the town hired an intern who's been doing the legwork, who actually went around and did the tests and did all this work. We've been working hand in glove with the town on this project. When they brought back the paperwork for the site that the MOE was asking me to submit, the paperwork just on its face showed that we were completely out of compliance. And not like a little bit. The site is in the wrong location. It's only allowed to have like a few things. The instructions for the site it's like 5 pages of instructions. It's not hard. And if you just read it on its face, we're in gross violation of all kinds of things. And it's not like we wanted to get the town in trouble or anything. We had already met with the MOE. There was zero option other than to do the right thing. And we did our best to get the town to do the right thing, but we weren't successful. So eventually the board of the Redo Roundtable took a vote, and we agreed that we had to go report this to the MOE ourselves.
Can I
Go ahead.
So I hear everything you're saying, but after reading again through the terms of reference, I don't feel that this committee has the expertise, the legislation, the authority to get involved in that part of the biochar initiative. We're here to provide advice to council and staff, but we don't have any authority, as far as I can tell from these terms of reference.
So to be clear, I'm not asking for authority. I'm just asking for what you just said, the ability for us to make recommendations to council. Like, for instance, right now, we have a remediation strategy that the MOE is excited about. We were like right at the end zone. There's some things that we need to do now, but literally, I don't know who to present it to. I have an intern the town has paid for, and we're like, well, what do we do next? Like, we have a bunch of action items. We've built a giant bioreactor. We're like, but if there's a better venue for me to discuss this, point me in that direction. Just don't tell me there's no venue for it, because it's really urgent and it's important.
Sean?
Yeah, so so bringing an update from the Reader Roundtable on the biochar project is fair and appropriate. But right now, the town is working with the MOE, not CC, to go through to determine what contamination exists on the compost site, at the compost site. We're currently lining up a contractor, working with a contractor to do the proper sampling. And then we'll be working with the MOE to come up with a remediation plan. And at that time, I would think the town would be discussing the possibility of utilizing biochar as part of the remediation of this site based on whatever the findings are. And that'll be the work between the town and the MOE. It's the town owns a compost site. The town's accountable to the MOE for any potential contamination. It's also a site which has had annual inspections from the MOE for decades. And so if there were any deficiencies or issues in the past, I'm sure they would have been raised. And I tend to think what we're seeing today is probably a different standard than what may have been applied when this was created 30 plus years ago. So I think there's a process here that's being followed. I know you asked for the Climate Protection Working Group or Civilian Oversight Committee to oversee the contamination and remediation.
The biochar initiative.
Well, which I don't believe is appropriate. I believe that, again, this is for the town to work with the MOE to ensure that we do properly identify what metals or contamination may exist at the site and that they're dealt with properly.
Good. Can I respond to that, please? So again, I'm just going to quote from this. The town of Smiths Falls remains committed to environmental sustainability and responsible diversion of waste materials from landfill disposal, said the Chief Administrative Officer, Malcolm Morris, which was the gentleman I asked to report it who declined to. We have identified, sorry, let me finish, please. You can interrupt in a second.
Well,
we have identified a series of action items related to the biochar project, and we'll be working closely with the Ministry of Environment, Conservation, and Parks to address. Now, I'm supposed to be in charge of the biochar project, and I don't know what those are. I don't know if you guys have allocated money towards it. I am the author of what was the remediation strategy until we did the right thing, and this town has become a black box. If you don't want any oversight over this, could you at least just tell us how much money have you allocated towards this remediation next year? Like, you guys are doing the budget right now. What are these action items that they've identified? Like, also, the report that you're talking about has been received by the town. Like, the town right now could just publicly show what the actual contamination levels is, and you're not. And I don't understand why. Go ahead now.
Okay. So the biochar project is a project of the town in cooperation with the Rio Roundtable, correct?
I mean, in this it says that the Reader Roundtable is leading it, but yes, go ahead.
But it's a town property. The town. And
it's owned by the town. It's actually in the municipality of North Elms.
We know where.
It's our property. We own the property.
Yes.
Okay. So it's the town's project where we've enabled the Rio Roundtable to complete a biochar pilot project to begin with on the site. And as for your suggestion regarding the CAO, I think it's to be respectful. You didn't even give them an opportunity to reach out to the MOE. Let me finish, please.
Sure.
Let me finish. No, because you made a conclusion yourself that he was not going to contact the MOEC.
No, he told me that.
Anyway, so if I can finish, please.
Sure.
There is work to be done here. We have a council which is accountable for the town. A council which you suggested I should remove myself from this because of a conflict of interest, suggesting I've been mayor of 10 years when you're suggesting contamination has occurred. Not to my knowledge, for one, because some council will not be getting that granular until we're told reports. But council has the authority to ensure this project, any remediation is done to ensure the proper sampling is completed. The report comes to council, we make decisions about how we proceed going forward. So it's disappointing to understand you don't believe council has the ability to oversee staff and its assets.
Could I push back on that? It's not that I don't think you have the ability. You clearly have the ability. You're choosing not to disclose the accurate information. And in lieu of that, excuse me,
The sampling, we've hired St. Lawrence to do the sampling.
I have a copy of the report. It clearly says these aren't small levels of heavy metals. I don't know what to tell you. That's not accurate.
Sue, go ahead.
Chair, I don't believe that this discussion should be happening in this committee.
Yep,
I really don't.
I agree. We're
I
off
think
point.
it should be happening between Nate and staff and council as appropriate, right? But not here, not now. So I would like to have us as a committee move on to other things right now. It's not appropriate here. Take it up with staff, with council directly, Nate.
How do I do
Not
that?
here. You present it to council.
They won't let
You
us. We've tried.
excuse me? You make a delegation to council?
Right.
Everybody can do that.
I know, we tried. They didn't respond to us. It was the first time we ever got crickets for that.
So I would second Sue's motion that we move off of this agenda item.
Okay, all in favor? Oh, Peter?
As president of the roundtable, it is not an easy decision to make that, we have to report to MOE. Because as an environmental organization, when you are faced with data that sort of poses on a class 1 wetland and the water intake safety zone, anyone that is even for a citizen, you alerted the authority, and hope the authority would take action. And in fact, I think it just so happened that that discovery was made just a week before Thanksgiving. People are away, right? And we in fact we actually have to call an emergency meeting to make that decision, and it's not an easy one. All right. Also looking at if this is a climate prevention working group, that things that happen to minimize emission of carbon, and I do believe the carbon biochar is one of the great means that we can capture carbon. and reduce it from 420 down.
Yeah, and I
Okay.
don't think anybody's
Right.
disagreeing with that.
Okay, hang on. Let me finish. This is a committee that have that mandate that we are actually addressing. So, progress actually should be reported to this committee to share, celebrate whatever advances we have. And hopefully we be able to share with other communities that they can take that on as well, right? So I think at this point here, what really bothers me is when the level of contamination, example, take mercury, 20 times this.
I'm sorry, I have to interject here. There is a motion on the floor to move on. It has been seconded. I would like to see that acted on.
Okay.
We are getting
We're in the
into
minutes. This is in
we
the
are
conversation
getting
on the
into
Okay.
You
details.
presented the motion when we
Can I
were just trying to.
point of order.
make a motion. There's been a motion on the table
Point of order.
to, yeah, we're off topic here because we discussed at the beginning of this 6.1 that this may not be the venue to be discussing this.
Peter should
So
be
I'd
allowed
like-
to speak.
Pardon me?
Peter should be allowed to speak. Point of order.
Yes.
You got interrupted. That's not according to the rules. I'm sorry. I think Peter should be allowed to speak.
Peter, do you want to finish your thought?
I would say the biochar project is an appropriate project to report to this committee. Okay, that's my point. Yeah.
And we all agree with that.
Yep, we don't disagree with that.
Yeah.
But I think we're moving to move on from this discussion around contamination. So it's moved by Peter, or sorry, by Sue, seconded by Peter. All in favor? Moved. Okay,
So would this be a recorded vote?
Just to clarify, does that mean I'm not allowed to talk about the what we're doing with the biochar initiative in this venue from now on? Is that what was just decided? Just to be clear. That seems shocking to me. Like that's the response we get from the town. But if that's the deal, just tell me.
If I may, Madam Chair. No, I think it's important as we move forward to have updates on the biochar project.
Yeah.
At the moment, the biochar project is, I assume, is on hold until some further testing is done, so the town can evaluate what steps it needs to take going forward. And some of the information that has been circulated isn't correct. And the town is working with St. Lawrence. St. Lawrence, where we get the name of it here. Anyway,
It's gear.
testing and inspection, sorry, yes. And they have indicated that the testing is not, the testing is scheduled, the testing thresholds are Schedule 7, not Schedule 1 has been indicated. And as a result, the actual levels of contamination are much more acceptable and it's considered not potable water. Not potable groundwater from the source of where it's at. So that's what our consultant has indicated so far. So I think we have to be cautious about suggesting to the community that there is a risk to our drinking water. So and that's not factual. So I'm just gonna I don't want to go into any further debate. We've already said we would shut this. We would not discuss this further. But I think there has had to be some clarity provided. You want to talk about it after? We can talk about it after.
Please, yes.
Okay, so we'll move on to round table updates. I know, Sue, you had something to share, so maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, it was just, so I know that there's efforts being made to get Richard to come to the county meeting, which is just fabulous. And because there's just so much information now being shared there that is just valuable for this committee to know about. And so I'm just pulling up a document here. Oh no, I can't do it apparently. So I'll have to do this from memory. So we just had a very brief meeting at the county climate committee. I think the next one is going to be scheduled for early February. But next year, the county's climate staff are going to be working on a whole bunch of really interesting projects. So they're fully expecting the Lanark Better Homes program to be operational by mid-year. Still hasn't been technically formally announced, but everybody knows. And so that will be a huge benefit. This is going to provide financing to people who are middle and low income to do retrofits on their homes. And it will be loans that will be paid back through their taxes. So, and this is something that Smith Falls, as far as I know, can be participating in.
Yeah, many people have. Yeah.
So, so that's key. One of the other things, of course, is the green building standards. And you were talking earlier, Carl, about bringing in some capacity to ensure through the change in the official plans here, right? To ensure that we can move down that route, that path. And so the county is participating in a national program. Only 13 municipalities in the country are doing this, but it will be bringing green building standards to play here. So I think that's something that Smith Falls absolutely needs to be benefiting from, participating with. And there's a few other things there too. So, but I'll leave it because I can't remember. Sean was there for the last part of it, and I can't.
That's part of it too. Yes,
remember what else.
No.
But anyway, okay. Sorry, I thought I could connect, but I'm not succeeding. Anyway.
Although then I think there's a lot greater focus on resiliency.
Yes. That is very true. Sorry. Yes. And I know Tay Valley Township has money put aside to develop an adaptation plan. The county is doing that. I'm pretty sure Mississippi Mills is planning to do adaptation too. So there's opportunity here to work together to do that, right? And save resources. So yes, okay, that's it.
Thanks, Sue. Peter, do you have any roundtable updates?
Yeah, excited about the Home Week coming up next year. And definitely we would like to bring the What You Can Do as part of the celebration and inviting, for my part, former students to come back. And the second thing here is that I sort of announced that the Roundtable has a project that we call Rideau Eco Literacy Center, that we're now going to be working with 6 regional libraries: Canfield, Smith Falls, Perth, Westport, Big Rideau Lakes, and Merrickville. And so we've been doing a lot of community scavenging to get a lot of resources and volunteers, and hopefully we'll be able to encourage a lot of grade 1 to grade 6 students, and particularly for those who are in grade 1 to 3, their parents, involved in learning more about environment and taking action. And the library's job would be, Roundtable is to provide field trips. The libraries is going to reinforce that with on-land activities. And hopefully this will be a permanent thing.
Nice.
Okay, yes.
Good. Do you know, Peter, are there going to be any resources to support like eco-anxiety to help kids with that? I think that's going to be key. It's perfect.
Yes, we're open to,
Yeah.
In fact, we actually receive Trillium funding to hire a program manager. We have an intern who is now the program coordinator, and through her we have applied for a few more grants, and the program manager will further lead it to develop further. So this hopefully it's the beginning of a collaborative thing that will create more environmentally responsible citizens.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
I forgot to mention
sorry.
something. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
So, okay, Climate Network Lanark has actually gotten funding from the Peter Gilgan Foundation, which is the foundation that comes out of Peter Gilgan, who has Mattamy Homes. Okay, and so we will be starting our concierge program up probably effective March. So.
Maybe I'll just go quickly next. And I just wanted to provide a quick update on the climate change workshop that was put on by the Rural Ontario Institute. I think, Sue, you were there, right?
Yeah.
I saw your,
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody else had a chance to attend, but are you familiar with the Rural Ontario Institute at all? Okay, so they're a great resource in terms of helping rural communities get local data and statistics in terms of making decisions. And so they hosted a climate change workshop and it focused on the key climate change indicators. So it focused on growing season, winter season, humidex days, and precipitation. And it was an interactive workshop, so we all kind of split up into little different rooms. So I think this dashboard that they've created, it's a whole well-being dashboard, so they have lots of data in there, but we were able to layer climate data on top of social determinant of health data. So it was a really neat tool in order to sort of really get a good picture of your community, and it can drill right down to Smiths Falls. So when we get to that adaptation planning piece, I think it might be a helpful resource for us. So I'm happy to send out the slides if anybody's interested on that. So
Can I add to
Yeah.
that? So Roger Nelson, who is the person behind that data, is a local data guy.
oh, like from
Yes.
oh.
And he is more than happy to come and present to us, work with us, whatever, right?
Okay.
So, yeah.
Good to know.
Yep.
Thank you. I think I shouldn't say I think, but the health unit is a partner with this dashboard. It's just not me, but yeah, we're affiliated with it too. So that's a great idea. We should have someone who can come here.
And he's actually, we're talking about doing some presentations in the early part of the new year
Okay.
to learn more about what data is available, to make requests for additional data points if we want.
Excellent.
Yeah.
They even provide reports, like you can get a whole report for your community with a little bit of a cost, but yeah, they do a nice job. So, okay, Nate, do you have any roundtable updates? No. John, Peter, Steve, Marie. No. Okay. Any other questions, comments?
Just one question. Would the biochar project be reported here? Updates. I just want to get that clarification. Because the last motion sort of presents some confusion. Yeah.
I think what I heard was that yes, it would be appropriate for updates here at this table, but not on the contamination issue and investigation that's going on. That's a town. That's what I heard. I'm not sure if everybody else is in agreement with that, but
That's okay. I just want a clarification here because to me it's the appropriate body.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I will move to adjourn the meeting at 3:10.
Okay.
Can I have a Sue, seconded by Peter? All in favor? Meeting adjourned.
I'm sorry that got heated.